I woke up to the sharp, urgent ring of the hotel room phone at 5:07 a.m. The room was still dark, the Charleston skyline outside just starting to show the faintest pink of dawn. My head felt heavy from the previous night's rehearsal dinner. The laughter, the champagne toasts, the endless congratulations. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I fumbled for the receiver, my voice groggy. "Hello? Anna?" It was Emma, my maid of honor and my best friend since high school. Her voice trembled. You need to come to Daniel's room, right now." I sat up instantly, my pulse spiking. "Emma, what's going on? Did something happen to him?" She hesitated, her breath uneven. I think you should just see for yourself. Room 110, please hurry." The line went dead before I could press her for details. Still in my silk robe, I threw on yesterday's jeans and a hoodie, jamming my feet into sneakers. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Maybe he was sick, maybe there'd been an accident, maybe. The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt like an eternity. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. As soon as the doors slid open, I saw Emma standing at the far end of the hall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with the kind of pity that makes your stomach drop. "Emma," I said, striding toward her. "Tell me what's going on." She shook her head, glancing nervously at the door behind her. "Just be prepared." I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, harder. From inside I heard movement, the shuffle of feet, the low murmur of voices. The lock clicked, and the door swung open just enough for me to see Daniel standing there. His hair was tousled, his bare chest visible beneath an open hotel robe. "Anna," he started, but my eyes had already moved past him, drawn to the figure in the bed. At first, my brain refused to process it. The woman sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest, her hair spilling over her shoulders in loose waves, was my mother. Linda Williams. The woman who had raised me alone after my father died in a car accident when I was 8. The woman I had trusted more than anyone. For a split second, the world around me seemed to freeze. The patterned hotel carpet, the muted morning light filtering through the curtains, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with room service coffee, all of it burned into my mind like a cruel photograph. My mother's eyes met mine. Not shame, not fear. Just a smirk. The faint curl of her lip as if I'd interrupted something trivial. "Anna, honey, this isn't what it looks like." The oldest, most insulting cliché in the book. Hearing it from my own mother made my skin prickle with heat. Daniel stepped forward, trying to close the door behind him. "Listen, I can explain." I pushed the door open with one hand, my gaze still locked on Linda. "Explain what? That you decided to spend the night before our wedding in bed with my mother?" My voice was calm, almost too calm, but inside I felt something sharp and cold take root. Emma stood frozen in the hallway, her hand over her mouth, Daniel's face twisted in desperation. "Anna, please, it's not." I held up my hand to silence him. "Save it, both of you." Linda finally spoke, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Sweetheart, you've been so stressed about the wedding. Daniel and we were just talking, and..." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Talking. In bed, half naked, at dawn." The color drained from Daniel's face. My mother looked away, her smirk faltering for just a moment. I stepped back into the hallway, my voice steady but laced with steel. "You two enjoy the rest of your morning. I have a wedding to attend to." Daniel moved toward me, his hand reaching out, but I sidestepped him. Emma caught my eye, her expression torn between fury and heartbreak. "Call my lawyer," I told her quietly, "and say nothing to anyone. The day is going ahead as planned, just not in the way they expect." We walked down the hallway together, the sound of the hotel carpet muffling our steps. Behind us, I could hear the muffled sound of Daniel's voice, low and urgent, but I didn't turn back. By the time we reached the elevator, my mind was already working, pieces clicking into place. The shock was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but beneath it was something stronger, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This was no longer the day Daniel and I had dreamed of. This was the day I would take control of my life, my story, and my ending. As the elevator doors closed, Emma whispered, "Anna, what are you going to do?" I looked straight ahead, my reflection in the polished steel doors steady and unflinching. "I'm going to give them a wedding they'll never forget." And I meant it. The elevator glided down to the lobby, each floor passing with a muted ding that seemed to echo in the hollow space between my ribs. Emma stood beside me. Still pale, still wide-eyed. I could feel the questions building in her throat, but she stayed silent. She knew me well enough to understand that silence, for now, was my armor. When the doors opened, the lobby's polished marble floor reflected the golden morning light pouring in from the glass doors. Hotel guests bustled past us, couples in linen heading to brunch, a father chasing a toddler, a group of tourists chatting about the harbor. It felt almost surreal that the world outside my nightmare was still spinning like nothing had happened. We stepped out into the muggy Charleston air. The humidity clung to my skin, grounding me in the present. I inhaled deeply and forced my shoulders back. "Where to?" Emma asked softly. "The bridal suite," I said. "We stick to the schedule, hair, makeup, photos, no changes." Emma blinked. "Are you sure? After that?" "Yes," I said, my voice like steel. "If they think they've derailed me, they're wrong." I should probably explain something. My name is Anna Williams, and for the past 32 years I've lived with two constants: my love for art and my complicated relationship with my mother, Linda. My father died when I was 8, killed in a rainy night car accident on I-26. It was just us after that. Linda was beautiful, still is, in a predatory sort of way. With auburn hair she swears is naturally enhanced, and eyes that miss nothing. She worked hard, dated harder, and raised me with a mix of fierce protectiveness and unsettling competitiveness. When I was little, I thought she was simply glamorous. By the time I hit my 20s, I started to realize she wasn't just keeping me safe from the world. She was also keeping the world's spotlight firmly on herself. Daniel entered my life 4 years ago at a charity gala for the Charleston Arts Council. I was there representing my gallery, a small but respected space that specialized in regional artists. He was there as one of the evening's big donors, fresh off a high-profile surgery that had made the local news. He was handsome, in that clean-cut, all-American way, tall, square-jawed, with a smile that made people lean in when he spoke. We hit it off quickly. He listened when I talked about art, didn't flinch at my sometimes chaotic schedule, and sent flowers after our first date with a note that said, "I'd like to keep seeing where this goes." My friends adored him. My mother, well, she was fascinated by him from the start. At first, I chalked it up to her usual charm offensive. She liked winning people over, especially the people in my life. She called him Dr. Dreamboat once, in front of me, with a laugh. I'd rolled my eyes, thinking she was just being playful. Now, replaying that moment, I could see the way her hand lingered on his arm just a second too long. Back in the bridal suite, the team I'd hired for hair and makeup was already setting up. The air was filled with the scent of hairspray and the faint, powdery smell of loose foundation. I shrugged off my hoodie and jeans, replacing them with the silk robe embroidered with "Bride" in gold script on the back. The makeup artist, Kayla, greeted me with a bright smile. "Morning, Anna. Big day." "Biggest day," I said, returning her smile. If anyone noticed that my eyes were sharper than usual, they didn't comment. I sat in the chair, letting them work their magic, while my mind churned. The betrayal was still raw, but alongside the hurt was something else. A strange, almost clinical focus. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to cry in a locked bathroom, and I sure as hell wasn't going to give my mother or Daniel the satisfaction of watching me crumble. As the curling iron hissed, Emma sat nearby, scrolling through her phone with deliberate concentration. She kept glancing at me in the mirror. Finally, she leaned closer and whispered, "Do you want me to tell the bridesmaids? Prep them in case things get messy?" I shook my head. "No. The fewer people who know before the right moment, the better. I need the element of surprise." She nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You've got a plan, don't you?" I met her eyes in the mirror. "You'll see." I thought back to the first time I saw Daniel and my mother laughing together. It was at a Sunday dinner, just a few months into my engagement. She had poured him a second glass of Cabernet and leaned in close to whisper something in his ear. He'd thrown his head back, laughing, while I sat there, fork poised over my plate, wondering why I suddenly felt like an outsider at my own table. There were other moments. Text messages she'd claimed were about helping him plan something special for you. Unexplained absences on weekends when she was supposedly visiting friends in Savannah. And the way she'd looked at him at the rehearsal dinner last night, a flicker of something territorial, almost triumphant. I'd ignored my instincts. I'd told myself I was being paranoid, that my mother was just lonely and my fiancé was just charming. This morning had ripped away the last shred of that illusion. When the hair and makeup were finished, I stood and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like someone who just had her heart ripped out. She looked composed, regal, even. Emma let out a low whistle. "You look unstoppable." "That's the point," I said. A knock at the door interrupted us. One of the hotel staff handed Emma a cream-colored envelope. "This was left for the bride," he said. Emma passed it to me, her brows furrowing. I opened it slowly. Inside was a note in Daniel's handwriting. "Anna, we need to talk before the ceremony. Please meet me in the courtyard at 11. I love you." I folded the note carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the vanity. "He can wait," I said. As the photographers arrived, I posed for the usual shots, holding my bouquet, laughing with the bridesmaids, pretending to adjust my veil. Every flash of the camera felt like a frame in the story I was about to tell. The one they didn't know was coming. If my mother and Daniel thought they could humiliate me in secret, they were about to learn what public humiliation felt like. By the time we headed toward the church, the late morning sun was streaming through the Spanish moss and the oak trees, dappling the path with light and shadow. I walked with my back straight, my veil trailing behind me like a banner. Emma leaned in one last time. "Whatever you're planning, I'm in." I smiled faintly. "Good. You'll have the best seat in the house." And with that, we stepped into the cool, dim interior of St. Mary's, where every guest was already waiting, and where I was about to rewrite the ending of my own wedding day. It's funny how the mind works when it's been betrayed. The big, shocking moment, like walking in on your fiancé and your mother in bed together, hits you like a truck. But after that, the smaller things come rushing back, like puzzle pieces you'd been holding all along, too afraid to put them together. For me, those pieces went back almost a year. It started the night Daniel and I hosted my mother for dinner at our townhouse. I'd been working late at the gallery, closing out an exhibition, and by the time I got home, the kitchen smelled like rosemary chicken and garlic bread. Daniel and my mother were standing side by side, chopping vegetables, laughing like old friends. "You didn't have to cook, Mom," I'd said, setting down my bag. "Oh, Daniel offered to help," she replied with a wink in his direction. "We're quite the team, aren't we?" I remember feeling a little out of place, like I'd stepped into someone else's evening. But I brushed it off. They were just being friendly. Then there was the weekend in Savannah. My mother claimed she was visiting an old college friend, while Daniel told me he was attending a medical conference there. At the time, it barely registered. I was busy prepping for a charity auction and didn't think to connect the dots. A few weeks later, I found a photo on my mother's Facebook, her in a chic sundress, standing in front of the same historic inn Daniel had mentioned in passing. I asked about it, and she laughed. "Oh, darling, Savannah is tiny. I'm sure Daniel and I just happened to stay at the same place." "Coincidence," she said. I wanted to believe her. One of the clearest memories is from my birthday. Daniel had taken me to a waterfront restaurant, all candlelight and live jazz. The maitre led us to our table, and there, waiting with champagne already poured, was my mother. "Surprise," she'd said, her smile too wide. Daniel grinned. "I thought you'd like having family here." I remember trying to be gracious, thanking them both, but the truth was, it felt like my evening had been hijacked. Instead of romantic conversation, I listened to my mother and Daniel trade inside jokes about hospital politics and wine varietals. By dessert, I might as well have been the third wheel. Looking back, I can see the pattern. Moments that should have been mine somehow became hers. Even the little things stand out now. The way Daniel's eyes would flicker to her when she entered a room. The private smiles they'd share when they thought no one was watching. Once, at a family barbecue, I caught them in the kitchen. She was leaning against the counter, he was standing close, too close, with his hand braced on the counter beside her. They jumped apart when I walked in, Daniel mumbling something about needing ice. I told myself I was imagining it. I didn't want to be the paranoid fiancé who accuses people without proof. There were digital breadcrumbs, too. My mother is terrible with technology, often leaving her phone unlocked. One evening, while she was in the bathroom, her phone lit up with a message from Dee. It read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was, wow." When she came back, I asked casually, "Who's Dee?" She snatched the phone off the table so quickly, I almost laughed. "Just a friend from my book club. Daniel's name starts with D." But I pushed the thought away. The final straw, or what should have been the final straw, happened at our engagement party. My bridesmaids and I had been taking photos, and when I turned around, I saw my mother fixing Daniel's tie. Her hand lingered on his chest just a moment too long. He smiled at her in a way that made my stomach tighten. Emma noticed it too. Later that night, she pulled me aside. "Anna, I'm just going to say it. Your mom is way too comfortable with Daniel, and he's not exactly discouraging it." I laughed it off, telling her she was reading too much into things. But the truth was, I'd seen it. I just didn't want to admit what it meant. Now, in the bridal suite hours before the ceremony, every one of those moments came flooding back. Each memory felt like a neon sign I'd ignored, blinking the same word over and over: warning. I thought about my father, about how much he'd adored my mother despite her flaws. He'd been loyal, almost to a fault. After his death, I'd promised myself I'd never let anyone make me feel small or invisible. And yet, here I was, letting my mother and my fiancé play me for a fool. Except, not anymore. Emma sat across from me, watching me process it all. "You've been quiet for a while," she said softly. "I'm just connecting the dots," I replied. "And realizing I've been ignoring the picture they've been making for a long time." She tilted her head. "So what now?" I looked at her, my lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Now, I stop ignoring it, and I make sure the entire church sees that picture in full color." It wasn't just about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't give me a certain satisfaction. It was about reclaiming my day, my story, and my dignity. They wanted to humiliate me in private. I was going to expose them in public. In art, there's a term called negative space, the empty areas around the main subject of a painting or sculpture. The negative space is just as important as the subject itself. It shapes the way you see the whole image. My relationship with Daniel and my mother had been filled with negative space. The glances I didn't understand, the silences I didn't question, the weekends I didn't account for. Today I was going to fill that space with truth. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." I nodded. "Good. I'm going to need you front row." The stylist re-entered the room to adjust my veil. As she worked, I caught my own reflection in the mirror. My face was calm, my eyes clear. I didn't look like someone defeated. I looked like someone about to deliver the final brushstroke on a masterpiece. And when I was done, the image would be undeniable. By the time my hair was pinned, my veil secured, and my bouquet resting in a vase beside me, my plan was fully formed. Every detail of this morning, from Emma's pale face in the hallway to the note Daniel had slipped under my door, had sharpened my focus. I wasn't walking into St. Mary's as a blushing bride anymore. I was walking in as a woman who had been betrayed by the two people she should have been able to trust the most. And I was going to make sure everyone in that church knew exactly who they were. The first step was the evidence. 3 weeks earlier, when my gut first started screaming that something between Daniel and my mother wasn't right, I'd called in a favor from a client at the gallery. He was a photojournalist, retired now, but with the kind of instincts that could catch a politician lying through a smile. I told him, "I don't know if I'm being paranoid or if something real is happening, but I need eyes on them." He didn't ask why. He just asked for a list of dates. By the time the rehearsal dinner rolled around, I had a small folder of photographs, blurry enough to look accidental, sharp enough to identify. Daniel's hand on my mother's lower back outside a wine bar. The two of them entering a hotel together on a weekend I'd been told they were working late. And most damning, a grainy but unmistakable shot of them kissing in the parking garage beneath his condo. The photojournalist had offered to send them digitally. I'd told him no. I wanted them printed, tangible, something I could hold up if I needed to. The second step was timing. My plan had to be public but not chaotic. I didn't want a screaming match in the middle of the aisle. I wanted control. I wanted to dictate the moment, to keep them seated and stunned while I spoke. So I called the church coordinator, pretending to add a special surprise to the ceremony. A slideshow of photos that would play on the large projection screen during what would normally be the vows. She was thrilled. The guests will love it. Yes, I thought. They will. The third step was legal. Daniel had money, not as much as he liked people to think, but enough that a public scandal could hurt him professionally. My mother had, well, me. For years, I'd been supplementing her lifestyle. I paid for her car insurance, slipped her cash when her credit card bill mysteriously ballooned, and covered her medical copays without complaint. That ended today. I called my lawyer, Mr. Harris, on the drive to the church. Draw up a termination of financial support for Linda Williams, effective immediately, I told him. I'll sign it after the ceremony. He paused. Anna, is everything all right? Better than it's been in years, I said. Emma was my only co-conspirator. As we arrived at the church, she carried my bouquet while I carried the manila folder containing the photographs, the financial termination letter template Harris had emailed over, and a sealed envelope addressed to the Charleston Medical Board. Inside was a summary of Daniel's extracurricular activities, complete with the photos. Front pew, left side, I instructed her. When I give you the nod, you hand me the folder. You're sure you want to do this here? In front of everyone? She asked. I looked toward the grand wooden doors of St. Mary's, already hearing the faint murmur of guests inside. This is the only place to do it. The sanctuary was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the aisle in splashes of blue, red, and gold. The air was cool and faintly scented with lilies. Rows of guests turned to watch me enter, smiles blooming like they had no idea the kind of storm I was about to unleash. I kept my pace steady, my gaze fixed ahead, but my peripheral vision caught the details. Daniel at the altar, looking handsome and smug, and my mother in the front pew, wearing a champagne-colored dress that was dangerously close to bridal white. She gave me a smile that might have fooled anyone else. The ceremony began smoothly. The pastor spoke of love, trust, and unity, words that curled like smoke in my ears. My hands were steady on my bouquet. When the time came for the vows, I stepped forward. Before I speak my vows, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. I want to share a few pictures with everyone here. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think these will explain more than I ever could. The coordinator, unaware of what she was about to unleash, dimmed the lights and started the slideshow. The first photo flashed up. Daniel and my mother at the wine bar. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The second, them entering the hotel together. Louder whispers. The third, the kiss in the parking garage. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath from someone in the front row. Daniel's face went from confusion to horror in seconds. My mother's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles whitening. I turned back to the congregation. These were taken over the past few months during the time Daniel and I were engaged. The woman in the photos is my mother. The man is, or was, my fiancé. I learned the full truth this morning. Silence, except for the faint creak of someone shifting uncomfortably in a pew. I won't be marrying Daniel today, I continued. But I thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the reception. I've paid for it after all. Consider it a celebration of freedom instead. I handed the microphone to the pastor, stepped down from the altar, and nodded to Emma. She placed the manila folder in my hands. I walked to my mother first. I slid the financial termination letter onto her lap. You've been funded for the last time. Then to Daniel. I handed him the envelope for the medical board. They might be interested in knowing what you've been doing off-call. Neither spoke. Their faces were frozen masks, caught somewhere between fury and shame. I turned back to the guests. Thank you for your time. Please, help yourselves to the champagne. I'll be in Italy by Tuesday. And with that, I walked out of the church, sunlight spilling over me like a spotlight. The heavy oak doors of St. Mary's shut behind me, muffling the gasps, whispers, and nervous shuffling of feet inside. Outside, the Charleston heat wrapped around me like a second skin, but it felt clean, like I'd stepped out of a suffocating room and into fresh air for the first time in months. Emma caught up to me, bouquet still in hand. You were incredible, she said, breathless. I was honest, I replied. And I'm done. We walked to the waiting car, the driver's eyes flicking curiously between us but saying nothing. I slid into the back seat, my veil pooling in my lap, and exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. The fallout started before I even reached my apartment. My phone buzzed with a string of messages. Missed calls from Daniel, a few from my mother, and then the group text from my bridesmaids exploding with questions. Emma scrolled through them and smirked. Word travels fast. By the time I kicked off my heels at home, the local gossip blog had already posted about the wedding that stopped mid-vows. They didn't have all the details yet, but I knew it was only a matter of hours. Daniel tried calling again that evening. When I didn't answer, he sent a text. Anna, we need to talk. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I can explain. I typed back a single sentence. No explanation needed. The medical board has your file. He didn't reply. 2 days later, my lawyer called. The board acknowledged receipt of your materials, Mr. Harris said. Given the photographs and timeline, I'd expect them to launch an ethics investigation. That's their job, I said simply. And your mother? He asked. I smiled without humor. She's been cut off, permanently. Sure enough, by the end of the week, my mother showed up at my apartment building, dressed in her usual designer blouse and oversized sunglasses. She buzzed my unit from the lobby, her voice dripping with false cheer over the intercom. Anna, darling, let me up. We need to talk about what happened. I pressed the button to respond. What happened is you slept with my fiancé. We don't have anything else to talk about. You're being dramatic, she snapped, the facade slipping. You're going to regret treating me this way. I'm your mother. Not anymore, I said and hung up. She didn't buzz again. Emma and I left for Italy the following Tuesday, just as I'd promised. Rome, Florence, Venice, each city felt like another layer of ash being brushed from my skin. I wandered through art museums, stood in front of canvases older than my family line, and thought about how small my old life suddenly seemed. One afternoon in Florence, Emma caught me staring at Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Thinking about them? She asked. I shook my head, thinking about how I almost let two selfish people define my life. Never again. Back home, the ripples of that day continued to spread. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Daniel had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Patients were canceling appointments. The hospital's PR department was scrambling. As for my mother, the social circle she valued so dearly had grown cold. Friends she'd bragged to for years were suddenly too busy for lunch. Without my financial help, she sold her car within a month. I didn't gloat, but I didn't pity them either. They'd built their own cage. I just stopped standing inside it with them. The gallery thrived while I was gone. My assistant had handled sales brilliantly, and a local magazine featured us in a spread about Charleston's hidden art gems. When I returned, I threw myself into work with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had walked away from a marriage and a mother, and in doing so, I'd walked straight back into myself. Months later, I was invited to speak at a women's business luncheon. The topic was owning your story. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, some young and eager, others older and battle-tested, I decided to share the truth. I was supposed to be married this summer, I began. Instead, I found out the night before my wedding that my fiancé was having an affair with my mother. A ripple of shock moved through the room. But I kept going. I didn't hide it. I didn't run away in tears. I told the truth, in the same room where they planned to start a life built on lies. And walking away from them was the best decision I've ever made. By the end, women were nodding, some even wiping their eyes. I wasn't just telling a scandal. I was telling them that they could reclaim their own endings. After the luncheon, a woman in her 50s approached me. My sister stole my boyfriend 20 years ago, she said quietly. I wish I'd had the courage to do what you did. I smiled. It's never too late to choose yourself. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights twinkling below. My phone buzzed. An email from the medical board confirming Daniel's license had been suspended pending disciplinary action. I set the phone down without responding. A year ago, that news would have consumed me. Now, it was just background noise to a life I was finally living on my own terms. Sometimes I think about the church that day, the gasps, the murmurs, the way sunlight spilled through the stained glass as I walked out. For a long time, I thought my wedding day had been ruined, but now I see it differently. It wasn't the day my life fell apart. It was the day I stopped letting other people write it for me.